A while ago I made a statement that George Carlin had grown up when it came to comedy, while Bill Maher didn't, showing what happens when you haven't actually watched someone for a while, and you have venerated them as wise when you were younger. Bill Maher and George Carlin both kind of tried to take up the mantle for Bill Hicks once he died, and both had some really great points and some really bad advice, like anti-vaxxing in Maher's case, but at least Bill Maher isn't telling people that voting is useless. Pushing against the supposed PC culture of the 90s was how they both made it big. It made them edgy at the time. Challenging all the societal norms was edgy. Fiscal libertarianism was given legitimacy for the first time since the 1930s by strawmanning or misunderstanding liberalism or progressivism. Atheism and heavy drug use were touted to get a rise out of the audience. Blasphemy for the sake of blasphemy was hilarious, and if the majority believes something, it must be wrong. There's nothing wrong with blasphemy and challenging the current narrative, but if you can't represent your opponent correctly, you aren't helping anyone. Penn and Teller followed them early this century, making the idea of blasphemy for the sake of blasphemy seem cool. Blasphemy is completely useless if you don't have a methodology to actually discover the truth. Only blasphemy with an equal mix of humility can lead to enlightenment. Otherwise, you're just self-flagellating about how awesome you think you are. The most damage this philosophy movement of comedy did was to create a massive level of apathy, especially among the Gen Xers. George Carlin was one of the biggest contributors to that in his rant about not voting. Not only not voting, but telling people not to vote. He rightly starts his rant out blaming the politicians on the voters. He says that Americans are all about instant gratification, they're materialistic, lazy, and dumb. Then turns around and says the most lazy instant gratification statement a person could say. He says that voting is meaningless, ignoring all the historical changes caused by the hard work of people to change the minds of Americans, and to get people the right to vote and get them to the polls, no matter how long it took them. Carlin was ignorant of how the system works when it comes to data crunching and demographic analysis that candidates must use to win or die trying. He was also ignorant of how important local elections are, and if you and people in your area don't vote in local elections, your area gets completely ignored, which more often than not helps to make your area poorer. If you want more information on this, please watch the 4 videos I have in my channel called What is Activism? Link to the channel is in the below bar. He tries to humorously claim that people voting is the problem, even though they are at least actively doing something and have to make a decision, and his not voting makes him more morally superior because he did nothing. This is a nation of compromise. Our broken 2-party system, as bad as it is still better than a 1-party system or monarchy. As I preach over and over again, ranked choice voting would allow multiple parties to compete in the US, but George was either too apathetic to look into alternative ideas, or too apathetic to put the hard work and energy needed to change it. He, like so many apathetic people, think that inaction on hard choices and compromise is better than no action at all. He would be the kind to watch a trolley car destroy 10 people, eat popcorn and laugh at the person morally torn by the active choice to switch the tracks and kill just one person, saving more total lives. That's a kind of self-important rationalization for apathy his hypocritical instant gratification helped create. His childish mindset was burn it all down, which happened in France and led to decades of starvation, murders, barbarism, then an emperor who went and invaded other nations. Burn it all down never works. The idea that some glorious phoenix of liberty will rise up among the people is naive and childish. Voting for, say, Trump just to show the Democrats, since they didn't elect Bernie, won't burn it down. It will be a very slow, gradual burn locally. We're a superpower running on decades-old legacy technology that will last us in a pinch for a few more decades. We also have the biggest, most expensive military in the world. What will happen is other nations will burn for our choices, as our horrible new leader will declare war on people who happen to call him names. The mindsets will shift by the impacts of the bully pulpit and more censorship will be permissible. I remember the Bush years. They were awful. Sex and violence are at an all-time permissibility, but information about what we're doing in other countries is now well censored by the media. And let's tackle the myth of the lesser of two evils. It's an entirely childish idea. One candidate gets you some of what you want, because this is a nation with many different viewpoints and ideas. Not everyone wants the same thing. Our two-party system requires both to package ideas from all different people in a majority that most of these groups agree on and embody them into themselves. Sometimes they're a collection of ideas from across the political spectrum. Sometimes when the nation becomes culturally partisan, they follow lockstep a set of cultural, demographically agreed values based on social pressures and propaganda. the party will almost never commit political suicide, much like how until this last decade, neither party would support gay marriage because the nation was so homophobic. But the equal rights movement figured out how to craft, explain, normalize, and empathize their problem to the rest of the nation, allowing candidates to actually take a side on the issue as opposed to never touching it. It's both voting and social movements that make change in America. It requires education, organization, networking, fundraising, a ton of hard work, but in the end, voting. Sadly, one of the reasons why your candidate always disappoints you if you are on the left is because the second they get into power, they have to pivot to the middle because all data shows that liberals don't vote in the midterms because they're lazy and don't bother paying attention beyond the end of their nose and use all of Carlin's arguments to justify their apathy until the bright, shiny presidential election comes along and you feel like you're getting to vote for your new king that will magically come in and save the nation and change everything, even though they have to deal with Congress that gets elected every other year and of course can't fix a lot of things, like education and police brutality because that's state and local issues that most liberals are even more apathetic about, then blame the president for not fixing it. Old people vote religiously and they're on average okay with brutal war, restriction of freedom, mass surveillance, and imprisoning of whistleblowers if it gives them the illusion of safety. Plus, all studies show they are way more likely to be old-fashioned racists and bad at spotting dishonest micro-expressions that younger people who don't vote can in the midterms. As disappointed as the Bernie supporters are, an even bigger impact you can have to move the party more left, if you don't do it already, is to vote in the midterms. But the last two midterms had the lowest voter turnout on records, and this primary for the Dems was a lot lower than in 2008. FDR and LBJ could push liberal ideas through Congress because they knew the voters had their backs to keep them moving more progressively. Democratic presidents know you've only got their backs for presidential elections, so they aim at the people who will actually turn out. We need a midterm revolution if we want real change. And that will have a way bigger impact than if we had elected Bernie. Hillary may not be what you wanted. You may have problems with her former positions on the TPP, which none of us actually know what's in it, and trade deals morph into something unrecognizable over a year or two of negotiations. Her political sluggishness on denouncing the Keystone XL. Her vote for the war in Iraq, even though the next year she came out against it once she realized Colin Powell, our most trusted general, had lied to America. Her views on Snowden and Manning, and her refusal to end the use of cluster bombs. But she has done a ton of good things and made peace with Iran, opened up Myanmar and Cuba, formed a better version of Obamacare before it was Obamacare with a public option, advanced help for women and children, began her career working with incarcerated teens and children with disabilities, helped get the CHIP program that helped millions of children get access to much-needed healthcare, helped expand healthcare to veterans, and fought to help get 9/11 responders the help they needed. It's always funny. When in power, Hillary's approval rating is through the roof. It's only when she has to play the game of getting elected that people suddenly distrust her. It's why being electable and being good at your job are two completely different things. Even Trump has done some good things here and there, though they're few and far between. So how about instead of voting for the lesser of two evils, which was meant to be a joke about how bad the two-party system is, and how the delegate math that has existed since the founding of this nation ensures only two parties can exist, more info in the bottom bar for how that works, how about voting for the greater of two goods instead of using people like Carlin's arguments to justify your instant gratification apathy that ensures that nothing gets better or more likely gets worse, like it did in the Bush years when Al Gore wasn't liberal enough so they voted for Nader, then got absolutely nothing they wanted and a national backwards movement on progress, which led also to a geopolitical international backwards movement, making the world much more dangerous. Unless you think both candidates are equally horrible and will move the nation in the exact same direction, voting third party accomplishes nothing, unless they have candidates on down-ballot races, which they rarely do, ensuring running third party is more of an ego booster than an actual strategy. I would recommend voting third party locally if you have the option, and just completely ignoring them as presidential candidates. But even voting third party is still better than doing what Carlin did on election day and doing nothing, as none of your voice is used at all to calculate the campaign goals of the next election. So go vote, get over your apathetic instant gratification that Carlin preached so strongly against, except in this case, and go vote. Then, after the election, go start a group in your area to work on ranked choice voting with fairvote.org, like I did a few years ago when I lived in Indiana, to kill this two-party system once and for all and ensure that you can vote for the greater of many goods instead of the greater of two goods, or, as it's childishly referred to, the lesser of two evils.